Welcome to Masterclass. I'm Pamela Jaccarino, Editor-in-Chief of Luxe Interiors and Design. I'm so pleased to have a very special guest today. He's an icon of interior design and in welcome you.
How are you, Pamela? So nice to be here with you.
It's good to see you. How have you been holding up during our COVIDian times?
Well, to tell you the truth, oh God, I leave without the mask. Then halfway down, I think, oh, I have the mask. Go upstairs, get the mask, come down. It's really such a hard time on everybody. I think because of business, because of physical, I think our industry is having a hard time, I think. I think everybody's having a hard time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have these moments when I'm like getting out of my car if I'm driving, where for a minute, I don't put the mask, I like forget. I feel like we're back in normal times, and then it's on with the mask. And so it's yeah, it's a lot of stress. I will say though, I think that the design industry is, and most people are just incredible at adapting. But what a year it has been, and this too shall pass. And what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, yes?
What doesn't kill you makes you stronger, yes. Well, I think that what's interesting is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think people living in their homes for months and months and months, when this, knock wood, is all over, I think that they're going to realize, like, my God, I need to change my home. I need to bring something, make it more comfortable, make it a little more, present. So I think it will pay back to our industry when things settle down.
I do too. I think it's a lot of people are prioritizing things differently, and I think the home is an area that people are prioritizing. It's one, you can't really do, we were so busy, just everyone traveling and going, and a lot of distractions. And so when those distractions get eliminated and you're stuck at your home.
Right.
I know for me, I've gone through, I sort of want what I want within means, obviously. So yeah, chalk it up to weird times. But I want to take it back.
Look at the stock for restoration hardware. It's one of the few that keeps going up and up and up. It's amazing. Everybody's buying from home.
Everyone's buying. So Vicente, this is interesting. The first time I heard you speak was many, many years ago at a design event, and that your talk stayed with me all these years. And your talk was very much from the heart. You talked about confidence, lack of confidence, how you had gained yours as a designer, and sort of what you're about. And talk a little bit about what it was like. We're going to get into sort of the details of how you started, but what is it like to start as sort of an underdog? And for you worked your way up to be, one of the most accomplished designers in our industry. Talk a little bit about that with our viewers.
But let me ask you, do you think a dog knows that he's down there? It's the way it is. I mean, I think that ignorance is wonderful at times, because I was more focused on where I wanted to end up than where I was. And once I found that interior design was the thing I wanted, it just propelled me. And, being in the right place at the right time makes such a big difference. I don't know that if I were now at this time where I was then, that I would have succeeded. But I think that just being in a situation where design was changing, where there weren't that many designers out there, just made it a much easier thing for me.
Well, I think also it had a lot to do with you and who you are, because you started your career in a very unusual way, and I would say there's a lot of things about you that are unconventional, which I love, and that's really what's motivated and helped you. But you say very openly, like, you got fired a lot. You were an actor, you worked at Bird Dog for Burger Goodman's, and you kept on getting fired. You ended up in the design and decoration building in New York. And this is interesting. You freelanced really sort of to learn the design business, and back at that time, you have said that you like to work for designers who are really bad, which runs very counter. Most people would say, I want to work for the best, but you like the opportunity to shine in areas that they could not. What did you learn from working for bad designers?
Well, it was really, if you work for, listen, I know when I have people that have worked for me, you know, they become you. They start to think like you. That's what you want them to do, is to think like you. It's very hard when you leave to break away from that and then go back to who you are. But if you work for somebody who, I kept saying, oh my God, look how they present, how they build, how they run their business, you know, how they're designing, how they're treating the clients, I'm never gonna do that. It just it's much easier to see what you shouldn't do than what you should do, because the other isn't such a broad thing. I mean, seeing them, how a client would be coming in and they'd bring out baskets of fabrics and say, oh, which one do you like? Oh, we'll design the room around that, instead of conceptualizing. And I think that they were coming from the point of give them whatever they want, make the money, and not really follow their gut and their instinct and what they believed in.
It was also a time when you were coming up when there was a lot of exploration about interior architecture. I mean, it was like the time of like John Saladino. There were really some great people that you were, you know, a part of. And do you think that that helped as well? Being at that, as you said, you know, the right time. And it's very different, right? Today, we have a lot of people that, you know, gain fame because of their Instagram and not because of, you know,
the creativity.
Work.
Well, you know, the thing, it was amazing because there were very few. There was Saladino, there was Brace Scheibel, there was Dorso, there was us. And I mean, we were doing things that none of the other designers were doing, which was doing the architecture, designing the furniture, really creating environments, not decorating spaces. And I think that there was a middle class that was really coming up fast, and they wanted to make their own statement. So being there just allowed it. And of course, the magazines, they wanted that because it was something new. So it was an amazing time because you were able to really let your imagination run wild. And the clients just loved it, you know. And there wasn't that sense of, well, I will tell you how to do it. They were, you're the professional, you're giving me what I've asked for, great. You know, it was, you know, okay, hindsight is always wonderful, but, you know.
Do you think it is, do you think nowadays it is harder for designers to be imaginative, or do you think with the fact that there's a lot more access for homeowners? I mean, you know, what would you say, you know, why was it easier to sort of let your imagination run free at that time as opposed to the times we're in now?
Well, but forget interior design, look at fashion. In the late 70s, you know, designers were creating looks that women went out and bought, and they bought the whole thing. That died. And the same thing in our industry, in that people now feel like I can do it myself, but I will, you know, it's easier if I hire a designer. They're coming in with preconceived ideas of what it should be without really understanding that you can have a lot of different ideas, but it's putting them together and creating an environment that is really, it's not about buying furniture. And it's a line that I'm using more and more with clients. The fact that it's not about buying furniture. Anybody can buy furniture, but not that many people can create environments. And then an environment is really what makes you feel good, because it's not about the individual pieces. but it's how you feel when you're in that space.
Well, I agree with you, but it's also, I would add to that, Vicente, that it's about vision. And I want to circle back to that in my question. So the theme, Vicente Wolf, unconventional genius. So you're also unconventional when it comes to design education. You did not attend traditional design school, and much of your huge success has come from making your own rules and your own vision, which I think it's interesting because you really let your range of vision be guided by your personal point of view, which I think is very strong. And as a child, you were dyslexic. You learned to absorb the world visually, which is a very different perspective than studying a book. Talk about design education, your type of education, and how it served you.
Well, you know, let's say if you didn't have any arms, your legs get very strong. Or if you don't have legs, your arms get very strong. When you're dyslexic, you're trying to find something to, you know, to be able to express yourself, to see it. So you're developing your vision because, I mean, to go to school, I mean, I never graduated high school because in Cuba, they just kept passing me in the grades because I just kept getting taller and taller. So it was a big problem because I couldn't absorb, I couldn't put it together. But visually, I can see things really, I mean, I was just designing a space not so long ago that I just sat there and I could literally see it in front of me. And I think that that was part of what has made me who I am. And the fact of educating myself visually by going to museums, by traveling. Now that I've gotten better with reading about different people and how they chose to live their lives, I think that that sort of starts to focus you on what you really believe in and not what rules you're being given to follow.
But I feel like it took you a little bit of time to accept that, right? Because there's the, you know, I mean, right, there's sort of the conventional way that the acceptable norms for how whatever your profession is, you're supposed to come up, which might be labeled as sort of, you know, a little BS, sorry. I think it's
I've been labeled much more than that.
It's so much more interesting to me to hear a story about someone like yourself who did it in a different way. I think it's inspiring, quite frankly.
But you know something, maybe if I wasn't dyslexic, I would have done very well in school and gone a different route. I think it's having the strength from wherever it may come to deal with what you've been given and try to make the best out of it to achieve what you want. And thank God I was creative. If I wasn't creative, I'd be in the street. I mean, for sure, because I just did not have what it took to be able to do an uncreative job. It just, my brain doesn't work that way. I mean, now I'm very good at business, you know, when I'm dealing with clients and things like that, but when you're working for somebody else, there are rules that you have to follow and how you have to produce things. And I just didn't have the thing to do it. But I think, and why I've always said it, that I was dyslexic and all these problems, is because I think there are a lot of people out there that beat themselves up. Not that I don't, and I do it constantly, but not when it comes to my creativity. I think that people have to really believe in themselves and believe that what they have to offer has a value. And I think that, let's say you say, well, I don't know if I have great taste. Well, most people don't have great taste. So that makes you better in business and more successful, probably because more people relate to you. Oh, you don't have any taste, neither do I, I'm gonna argue. So I think that, you know, you have to really believe that you're going to succeed. You have to believe that a higher power has given you a gift and that you must stand up for that. You must be really paying back for the gifts you've been given.
I think it's also about evolving. All of us, hopefully, are always sort of evolving and growing and right on this continual journey. And, you know, it's interesting for someone like you who's seen so much, you've designed so much, it's been so many years. How for you, and especially during these times, I know travel is very important to you. We can't sort of like get on planes now. How have you been keeping things and yourself fresh and pushing yourself forward?
Well, it's funny because I'm working on a new book that will come out next year. And working on that book and trying to bring forward a lot of the questions that you're asking me right now and putting that down so I can share with people really has given me an impetus to, you know, I read Martha Stewart's biography years ago, and, you know, her focus, whether it was prison, whatever, it was her focus that she just kept going. Whatever came from the side, she discarded. And I try to do that each day to pray for a higher power to give me that strength to not see the demons, not see the insecurities, but keep thinking of what it is that I want to accomplish. And, you know, it works some days and it doesn't. I think in the times that we're living right now, it's just so, you're being assaulted in so many different ways.
Yes.
It's so easy to just lay down and die.
Yeah, well, it's over. Yeah, it can be. I was with someone yesterday. He said, "Are you feeling extremely overwhelmed?" And I think it's easy to get sort of sucked into everything that's happening. And I agree. It can be harder to focus. Yet also, it's a time where it's interesting because there's a lot of chaos going on. I mean, you turn on the news and honestly, you just want to like jump out the window. But it's also a time where it's a little bit quieter. So we're not right because there's less places to go. And I think it's a time where you can sit with your thoughts a little bit more. Sometimes that's exciting. Sometimes it can be scary.
It's a problem.
Be a problem. So wait, I want to ask you about your book because this is your 5th book. Yes, is that correct?
Yes, it is. Amazing for a dyslexic person that can't spell and has it hard to read that I'm doing a book, but yes.
Well, this is why we love you, Vicente. You just keep on keeping on. But okay, so 2 questions. When is it coming out? And then what is the gist of it? Can you share with us what this book is about?
So it is, it's a 2-part. It's left brain and right brain. The left brain talks about, as you said before, from the heart, the story of my life, the good things, the bad things, the things that I was picking up as I was growing up, and how I got to where I am right now. The second half is questions and my answers to them from my personal experiences. They're not rules, but it is how I've dealt with these particular questions. And then with it are photographs that are sort of explaining what I am talking about. The first 3 books that I did really had such a wonderful response from people. A, because they felt that there was an honesty to it. The fact that I was able to share what I believed in, and not from a pompous point of view, but from what's the word? From a humble point.
Pride. Well, right, and pride in what you do, which you should have.
So I wanted to touch that again and to make, in a time like that we're living, that people can say, got it. If this guy didn't graduate high school, didn't do that, and look where he got, I can do the same thing. And I think I think it's important that you should be able to give hope to people. Because
well, that's what you did. This is what, when I'm telling you, when you spoke, I will never forget. So that is exactly what you were speaking to, sort of like that the reality that, right, we're all sort of walking around with insecurities, with no one's perfect, that, you know, we all have sort of our flaws, and you really have to accept them and then try to work with them and around them to get to a level of expression that touches who you really are, which I think, you know, you're all about that.
Well, I hope I'm not still saying the same things I did then, said then. I think about that. I think about, well, you know, you give this talk and you talk. Is it the same shinola that one is repeating? I mean, is there any new message that one can give? And I've certainly, that's what I tried to do with the book, is to give it a different way, say it a different way, you know.
Well, it's always inspiring. We're looking forward. We're looking forward to that. Is it next spring that it's coming out, or next fall, Vicente?
I think next fall. I mean, because all the books that were coming out this year, a lot of them have been pushed.
Yes, I know.
I hope for the spring, but I think the spring is full already. So
yeah,
the fall. And it'll be a wonderful new fall with.
I know. Let's hear. My fingers are crossed.
My legs are crossed.
Everything's crossed. So I also want to ask you about, you are very involved with giving back, and you're involved with God's Love We Deliver. And I was hoping that you can talk a little bit about the organization for our viewers, and, you know, the good work that you do and that the organization does as well.
Well, the organization does very good. They serve 1,700,000 meals a year. And the moment that a doctor calls and says, Mr. X is not well, cannot feed himself, they will immediately prepare specific meals to their diets, deliver it, have somebody bring it to their door, say, hi, how are you? How are you feeling? If it's their birthday, a little cake is made. It's just trying to really bring humanity, bring love, God's love to these people. And if it's a mother and she has 2 children, the children get fed as well. And it is something that it's not just whatever food is being given, it's specifically prepared to their dietary needs. And I think especially in a time like this, where we are all trying to watch out for ourselves and trying to survive, these people that are out there who are they may have cancer, they may have so many different types of diseases that debilitate them. Having that food, having that sense of love coming to them is the thing that may keep them alive or not. It is proven that people that eat healthy foods are able to get well faster and live longer. And that is what we're trying to do, because it's costing this country millions and millions of dollars to having people in hospitals, when if they're fed well and they keep healthy, they will live and not have to be in the hospital.
Yeah.
So anybody out there that wants to donate, it's God's love. And whether it's $5, $2, whatever it is you have, it's really, you know, that it's going, 90% of the money that comes in goes to the charity, which is very different than a lot of charities out there, that 10% goes to the charity and the rest goes to running.
Administrative, yes.
Right.
Well, that's good. I think at the time it's so important. I mean, we're living through, you know, a pandemic, a time of great division within the country, and where, as you said, people are just all about themselves, and I think it's just so important for people to show that they care about, you know, others, and that they literally lend a hand to help. Now, you know, always, but especially now.
Maybe we've lived in a period before of a lot of self-involvement, a lot of me and how much money do I want and what do I need. I think that what we're going through right now puts a stop to it. A friend of mine in Italy, she said, maybe this has been good. We've had to stop to think about really what is important and what do we need. And I think that thinking of charity and thinking of giving to others, I think it's a way of lifting our souls and lifting our well-being.
I do too. I have a final question to ask you, Vicente. What is happening with your photography? Are you still photographing? And
Yeah,
you are, for everybody who does not know, in addition to everything Vicente does, his 5th book, and all of his incredible interior environments that he's created, he's also an incredible photographer. So I wanted to ask about that as my final question.
Actually, I was photographing a job, not of mine, but of somebody else today. The whole book is, all the 4 books I've photographed. That's what I've been doing for the last 3-4 months is photographing. And very exciting. Last Friday, somebody bought one of my photographs for their living room that got blown up 8 feet high by 5.5 feet wide. And I was there being hung, and it was like, wow, I did that, Interiors, I know it's going to come out well. But each time I see one of my photographs and they're in focus, that, hey, I mean, I did that, So now the cameras do it for you. But, it's something I love doing when I travel, when I'm here. It's so immediate. When you take a picture, you saw it. When you're doing interiors, it's like 9 months, 8 months of waiting to have this child. But a photography and the emotion that a good photograph can have can just bring you to another level.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it was so nice to speak with you today. I hope that I get to see you in person sometime soon. I don't know when I'm gonna, when we're gonna get back to dinners and cocktails.
If you come, I have a terrace, and now everybody's come for dinner, and we sit at the terrace, which is fresh air, so you can take off your mask.
Okay, we're gonna get our friend Timothy Corrigan. Timothy, if you're watching, and we'll have a reunion. How's that sound?
That sounds the best.
Thanks for being part of Masterclass, Vicente.
Have a good week.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to DesignTV by SANDOW. Today, we're going to be talking about some groundbreaking research and some amazing initiatives on how we can fight climate change with interior design. For any of you who have been following the conversations around carbon and carbon neutrality this year, we started there with some big pledges. Microsoft pledging to go carbon negative by the year 2040, Amazon signing on 3 major partners to go carbon neutral by 2030. So some amazing commitments this year. But within our industry, within architecture and design, a lot of the attention has focused on architecture, on structure and envelope, and the difference we can make there. Because as we look to bring down our carbon emissions, the focus has shifted to what we call embodied carbon. Embodied carbon, of course, being all the emissions, all that smoke and carbon dioxide we put in the air in the process of extracting materials, turning them into products, and assembling those products into buildings, right? So all the things that happen before the building actually opens to the public and the lights get turned on. And that carbon that we call embodied carbon, we've focused most of our attention on sort of what we've understood as the big offenders, steel, right? Those things in studies so far have accounted for the biggest percentage of embodied carbon, but that's because studies have focused on the structure and the envelope of buildings. Interior design, as interior designers know, is an entirely other ball game. Interiors turn over every few years, especially commercial interiors are renovated every few years. So the carbon footprint of interior design is a complex thing to understand. And yet new research shows that interior designers can do more than they think. And so to talk about that today, we have an amazing group of panelists. We have with us Jennifer Chen, who's an interior designer with LMN Architects in Seattle, who's done a groundbreaking study on the embodied carbon of interior renovations, looking at LMN's own office as an example. We have with us Lisa Conway, who is the VP of Sustainability Americas at Interface, which launched its first carbon negative products as part of the Embodied Beauty Collection. Carbon negative, meaning that it's not just that these products don't have a carbon footprint, but that they actually give back to the environment, they offset or sequester carbon. So that's absolutely fantastic. Also with us today is Meghan Lewis, who's a senior researcher at the Carbon Leadership Forum, who has studied the carbon footprint of a tenant improvement project at WeWork. Tenant improvement, of course, is one of the major fields of work for commercial interior designers in particular. So we're excited to hear what she has to say as well. Thank you all so much for joining me today. This is fantastic.
Sure, thank you.
Chen, you studied the renovations that your office has gone through since the building that it's a part of was built in 1960. So we're talking about a 60-year period and multiple renovations in that period. Tell us a little bit about what you found in terms of embodied carbon.
Yeah, so the Norton building that our office exists in has been in existence for 60 years, but our office actually moved in 84, so we've been there about 36 years. Yeah, and like Avi was saying, you know, as an interior designer, I started really wondering what the impact it would be for the TI cyclical renovations, because a lot of times when we look at the finishes or the interior embodied carbon impact of a point in time or when the building is first built, it's only a fraction, sometimes, you know, 17%, something less than 20%. So it's not significant compared to structure and envelope. But when we used our own office as case studies, even only in the 36 years we've been in the building, we went through a cycle of renovation about every 9 years. And what we found was we studied the cumulative embodied carbon of all the renovations only through 36 years, and the overall embodied carbon impact is actually almost 3/4 of what structure would have been. And, you know, because as Avi said, the building is 60 years old, and if we had been in that building for 60 years, and we can assume that maybe 9 years prior to our first move in, we had another renovation. So if we added all that up together, the cumulative embodied carbon of interiors or the cyclical structure and envelope. So the impact is quite big, and our office, at least the current iteration, actually has a very minimal palette, and it's an open office with open ceilings, not a lot of walls. So you can see if we start to add in all the little pieces that go in interior design or interior finishes, it's actually quite a big of impact, even just in a short span of a few cyclical renovations.
This is a huge deal. You know, I can't believe that, you know, for such a long time, we've entirely missed the idea that interiors are taken out and put back in every few years, and therefore that the embodied carbon would add up. You know, so what looks like 17% when a building is new, over time as tenants come in and leave and come in and leave, that's as much as, you know, structure and envelope, which is what you found. It's absolutely astounding. But it also is a message of hope, right? It means that there's a lot that we can do as the interior design industry to contribute to that larger fight against climate change. So thank you so much, Chen, for the work that you've done. Meghan, I want to get into a little bit of detail with you. You worked on the single tenant improvement project, basically when WeWork moved into a space. That was a project that was done with IA Interior Architects and Carbon Leadership Forum, where you now work, actually conducted the study for you. What interior elements had the biggest embodied carbon footprints? Were there any surprises there? So as you analyzed all the elements within that single tenant improvement, What did you find?
Yeah, so unlike the office that Jen just described, WeWorks aren't all open plan. So there's a balance of different types of spaces. And especially with some really small office spaces with just a couple of people. One of the things that was, the largest element to consider in that study was the walls. So the glass and storefront in particular, the aluminum glass, and then following that, the interior walls. So the wallboard, the insulation, the studs. And so one of the things that that sort of shows you, especially with the interior walls, is that there's a lot that can happen before you need to sacrifice, because there are obviously a lot of beautiful low carbon products out there, but before aesthetics are really even competing, where there's a lot of data available and lower carbon solutions that are out there. And because this hasn't been as much of a part of the conversation so far, I think there's been some missed opportunities to take advantage of those. Because it's one of those both and, not either or situations. And then there was also a little bit, and this is looking ahead a little to what research still needs to happen around HVAC and lighting. Those were following walls for us. And so those are things where there aren't necessarily as obvious of solutions, but that's why we need to start thinking about it now.
Right, absolutely. I think that's really interesting, and you made an important point there. So, while we have to care about the embodied carbon because it adds up over time, but any interior designer is responsible for the renovation that they're working on now. So you kind of have to think about your contribution to that cumulative carbon footprint. And within that contribution, you've pointed out something really important that, before you start to talk about, we don't have options for this, options for that, the big contender is interior partitions and walls. And so, making the right layout decisions itself can have a huge impact. So thank you for pointing that out. As you said, MEP, so lighting and mechanicals, electrical, plumbing, there's still work to be done on that. We don't know fully the impact of those things. And of course, following that, if I'm not mistaken, casework, millwork, furniture, and flooring definitely are close followers onto that as part of your study. So, that's really interesting, is I think it gives us a hierarchy in terms of, what we need to focus on in terms of lowering carbon footprint, because we know that the little bit that we do now can make a huge impact over the life cycle of a building. And that's the power interior designers have. Lisa, can you talk to me about how Interface is responding to this idea? I mean, you've been thinking about this for a while now. Tell us about how you got to carbon negative with your new products and what the implications are.
Yeah, so a lot of our history is obviously tied to our mission from 25 years ago, Mission Zero. So we've kind of been working to lower the carbon footprint of our products over those 25 years, and nobody cared. There was no Metropolis, gathering on embodied carbon. That was just not happening. So we definitely did have a head start. But I think one of the interesting things is when you have a goal that really sounds impossible, which was when we launched our new mission in 2016 to reverse global warming, how can we take that and apply it to products? That was something that we knew how to think about how to get to zero, but ultimately we want to be restorative. And I think that, both Meghan and Jen, ultimately the reason that we're measuring how much the problem is to ultimately the moonshot goal is to get to buildings as carbon sinks. How can we design buildings that are actually part of the solution? Because just releasing less over time is not going to get us there. We need to actually draw down all of the excess and waste carbon that we've put up into the atmosphere. So has been a really exciting challenge. Carpet, if you're not paying attention, can be one of the big offenders, especially when you don't have a lot of walls. So really thinking about what are the hot spots of your space? WeWork is kind of unique in that there are a lot of partitions. We've moved a lot to open office in other types of cases. So flooring is a bigger contributor if you're not paying attention. So this is an exciting week that we're actually recording this, because on Tuesday, we launched our first carbon negative carpet tile, which actually stores more carbon than has been released to make it. So that is just kind of pointing us towards what's possible, hopefully for a lot more products than just flooring, so that we can get to those, you know, carbon negative spaces, carbon negative buildings someday. That's been really an exciting kind of beacon, I think, in this conversation, because usually it's like hemp or, you know, something supernatural. It's not the materials that we're typically used to all the time. But now you can get a product that, you know, that performs and looks the same as it always has, but has this kind of additional feature of really being restorative to the planet.
You know, this is the thing that interior designers have going for them, right? This is where we're lucky that we're in this industry, because, you know, when architects found out that, you know, structure and envelope concrete had such a big, you know, carbon impact, it's taken years to find solutions for low carbon concrete. The nice thing about interiors is that, as Meghan pointed out, and as Lisa is saying, you know, we have manufacturers who have been on the forefront, sort of ahead of the curve on this, understanding that, you know, the day is going to come when they're going to have to lower their carbon footprint, and have kind of prepared for that. So we're lucky. We do have options for low carbon products available, not in all categories, but certainly in some high impact categories, you know, and flooring being one of them. So thank you so much, Lisa, for taking us through that, because I think that's really important. To all of you, I'd love to hear, you know, so now we know that interiors are part of the problem and therefore part of the solution, right? We know that we have to do something about this. We didn't have the data until now, but at least now we can start to say, studies and numbers are pointing us to the fact that interiors have a much bigger impact than we've ever guessed before. Now that we're at this juncture, what is sort of the long-term process we need to take? Like, how do interior designers, how does the interior design industry as a whole, designers, manufacturers, you know, our contractors, clients, all of us together, work towards bringing down embodied carbon emissions?
I think that no matter where you sit in this conversation, whether you're a manufacturer or a designer or a building owner, I think it's about thinking about the emissions beyond just what you emit and into the supply chain. You know, where for someone like Jen, LMN's operational energy impact is not big. You know, their biggest lever is the supply chain of all the stuff they specify. When Meghan was at WeWork, it wasn't WeWork's operations, it was the supply chain. We need to do both, but I think that the reason that we're having this conversation is because we all know how to think about operational carbon. You know, at home, it's about saving money on our energy bill, et cetera. What we're trying to shine a light on is really thinking beyond that to parts of our carbon impact that we influence but may not control. At Interface, that's not, we don't make our own yarn, but we're responsible for the impact of that yarn because that's what we make our products with. So really using the opportunity to not only focus on what we control, but also what we influence, and having those conversations and using our buying power and spec power, et cetera, to be able to have those conversations with for us, our top suppliers, you know, really for anyone in the conversation with your top suppliers to really move the needle.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, jumping in from an interior designer point of view, I mean, like Lisa said, the spec power, I think it's taking that next step and really thinking about what product are you putting into your, like you said, the current project, because, you know, there's the time that we're trying to race to for carbon neutrality, and comparing the products and knowing what's out there and continuing to kind of push for transparency is the level that I think we've been communicating to the manufacturers at. And then now is the time that we can now take the next step and really compare the information that we get from this disclosures from manufacturers and understanding what decisions you can make to lower your impact in your practice.
Yeah, and jumping in a sort of thinking even beyond just exactly what product you use, which is a super important part of actually following through on making design decisions around embodied carbon. But I tend to think of it as sort of reuse, reduce, replace, optimize as a sort of 4 steps for your embodied carbon. I think some of those steps are going to continue to become easier to do over time as better solutions. So reuse, for example, right now is an area that is still somewhat, it's at the beginning of having a better reuse marketplace in the US, whether that's refurbished furniture or actually just harvesting building materials at the end of a building life so that they have a longer life. And then for reducing products, if it's a really high impact product, then use less of it. And then the sort of replace and optimize are more thinking about looking at different kinds of products that you could be using. And then optimize is really okay, I'm picking a carpet. There's a carbon negative carpet, and then there's one that has a high impact. That's hopefully a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Right. I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of the end of life of projects as well. From all your point of view, obviously that's the key thing for interior designers, right? So we're designing this project. We know that, in 10 years or so, it's going to be renovated in some way. And, whether it should be or not, we can have that conversation. But, continuing the status quo now, we know that, 10 years renovation is likely going to happen. How do we plan for that 10-year mark as sort of responsible stewards now? So if you're specifying and making decisions for a project now, what are some of the things we should keep in mind, for looking at sort of that end of life or demolition, disassembly, all of that stuff?
Yeah, I really want to reiterate the importance of the point that Meghan made in terms of reuse and that end of life. And I think of the circular economy concept, and I tend to think of carbon as something that you invest and not something that you want to spend. So if you can recapture a material and extend its useful life, you're kind of putting that carbon back into process and you're not just wasting that. And we talked about this a little bit in that if a building owner can go into a building and see what is in the building as something that has value after its current renovation cycle, then you can put that back into the next renovation and save not only in the economy sense, but also in terms of lowering the embodied carbon, because you're not putting something into the landfill and having to buy something new. And if we can design for deconstruction as much as we think about how something go together, then that would also help that process, because then you can easily take something apart and keep its value without damaging the material. So that's something that would be interesting to put into practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there are some solutions that are out there that are they're not quite as exciting because they're basically involve paperwork and contracts, fun things like that. But for example, there are carpet take-back programs. There are furniture reuse programs where at the end of a project's life, they can be donated or bought by other companies. But that involves really educating the project team, including the owner. And so having seen this from both the architect's point of view as well as the owner's point of view, that's a communication point that gets dropped sometimes because, it's difficult. It's 10 years out. So there's a high likelihood that everyone on that team could be different. And so making sure that it's written into documents in a way that people can find it later is tricky, but we need to get better at it.
Yeah, and I would say like one of the most frustrating things for us as a manufacturer is to see our product only be down for 5 years because it's made to last so much longer than that. Some of our education and healthcare customers will keep it down 20 plus years, but a lot of our corporate customers, which is the bulk of our work, that stuff cycles out so fast. So anytime there's an opportunity, even if you're not keeping it in the space, donating it for reuse in the local community, I think is something that everybody on the project can feel good about. Or it can, in our case, certainly come back to us. We don't get enough material back by and large from most projects. Most projects do not send that back unless it's a lead ID&C project where that's really being measured for a specific purpose. We would love to get more of it back. And one of the things that can be really missing in the conversation. Everybody has a take back program, right? A take back program. One of the things to really do the checks and balances on take back programs is what happens to it? Where is the post-consumer recycled content in your new products? Because there's a lot of lack of transparency around take back programs that is just sorely missing. So that's kind of an extra layer. I know it's an extra thing to do, but if you learn it on one project, you know, you can take that knowledge to the next one. But all of that, you know, first keep it in place, second donate it in your community, you know, third send it back to the manufacturer, but make sure that if you're sending it back that you know what's happening to it.
Right. You know, I'm sure we're going to hear this, Lisa, and I'm sure you hear it every time you bring this up with corporate clients. I know Jen, you know, you will relate to this as well, right? It's often like it uglies out before it wears out, right? So people want to change things because they want change. They want to change in their environment. They want, you know, they have a different philosophy. They moved into a space that was occupied by somebody else, right? So there's a lot of reasons why interiors get ripped out. There's lots of cultural reasons. And I'm just wondering if we can reflect a little bit on the cultural shift that we need to foster as interior designers. You know, what kind of, you know, aesthetics do we need to be open to? How can we change this culture of renovation without, you know, designing ourselves out of a job?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we sell is, most of what we sell is gray. So like if someone can't work with gray, I don't know, like, you know, like a lot of the stuff that's down is okay. And I think people just have like, they have trouble getting past it. So, you know, Jen can probably weigh in and probably Meghan too, just on what can stay. And I think the before and afters of, you know, this is what it looked like and we were using what was already there and this is what it looks like now. It doesn't have to be a complete replacement. And I think we're not used to that as a society.
Yeah, I would say, you know, people talk about timeless design a lot, and I think just by nature, maybe that's not how we think about spaces right now. I mean, we try to make it timeless, but of course, time change and you don't know what the next trend is going to be. But I think really thinking about the longevity and why you really need something in the space versus it's easier to rip everything out, but being that steward for every material that you put in, like Lisa said, like if you chose it, there must be merits to it. How do you make or extend its life and its useful life? And if not, have a plan for that end of life where it's not going to the landfill. That should be part of the design process, in my opinion, to really think about what the next step would be for this material. And then just in terms of cultural shift, thinking about that design for the next life would be important.
Meghan, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also thinking about and this goes back to designing for disassembly, thinking about each product and what the components are and whether all of them need to be replaced is another approach. So the same way that carpet developed tiles so that you could replace just individual tiles, thinking about things like furniture and other upholstery where, I mean, they need to be able to be taken off part of it. So you're not throwing away a metal or high quality wood product just because you got a stain on one part. And that goes the same with, you know, the uglying out problem. It's fine, then change the fabric, but don't get rid of really durable, high quality products before they need to be done. And I think part of it also does come to, you know, talking to owners about whether that needs to happen. And for some, I mean, and some things, you know, yeah, when I was at WeWork, there was a lot of people want their specific brand on every single piece of furniture. And then every time that changes, does that really all need to be turned over? And so that's going to be a longer term cultural shift around when we change a product standard. Do we need to go in and replace every single chair, or can we wait until the end of those chairs' life? Things like that.
Right, absolutely. I mean, you know, it seems like the fundamental way in which our interior design is distinct from maybe the practice of architecture. And I just want to say, even though we've been treating these as two sort of isolated professions, they're of course linked, and they're almost, melded into each other these days. But, the thing about interior design or interiors work in general is that, we have to go into the project considering that we're picking up the baton from the last interior designer that touched that space, really having respect for their work as we go into our work. It seems to be a way for us to at least build that culture that all of you have talked about, really, in terms of having respect for the materials that are already there. I'd love to close this out with maybe one thing from each of you that you wish interior designers would start paying more attention to. You've mentioned a lot of things already. Just pick one that people can start doing now in their work, to start paying attention now that we know that our work has such a huge impact on climate change.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, the thing that comes to mind for me is that I meet so many interior designers who are passionate about climate change, but will leave the work of carbon impact of buildings to architects and engineers. And I think that this whole conversation and tools that have come online, like the EC3 tool, it gives you a place to start, so that you can actually be part of the conversation, because the impact is huge. The impact is so much bigger in those specifications than what you do in your personal life. So, I'll meet vegans who, like, they do all these amazing things, in their personal life, but then when it comes to spec, it's like, oh, I just never have the right client, so they'll spec whatever. So really just, it's all one life, so if we can tie those things together, we can make huge impact, and we are an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, kind of piggying back on that, I would say the biggest thing I think for interior designers is to know that you have the power and to push yourself into that conversation early on, and set the sustainability goals with your internal team, with the client, and that will really help you in the long run. And this is coming, of course, secondary to really understanding what your own impact is, excuse me, and how you can make that difference.
Yeah, and I'd say if you want to further educate yourself, there are those two studies that the Carbon Leadership Forum has done are available. You can download them and look at what those impacts are over time, as well as diving into a specific project. And also think about how, don't assume that your owner doesn't care because they don't know about interiors and embodied carbon. If they have a carbon neutrality commitment that's more around operational, it's an opportunity to talk to them about, what do you know about scope 3 emissions? Did you know that interiors are a really big part of scope 3 emissions? And they're interested in that. They just don't know that there's a misconnect around language. And so I think that there's a lot of conversations to happen around that.
That's a great point.
Right, absolutely. I started this conversation talking about the big commitments that big tech has made in this past year to carbon neutrality or carbon negativity. Salesforce, as part of their commitment, has pledged that 2020 on, every interior space is also going to be assessed for embodied carbon. So there's cultural change on the horizon. It's coming. And I think as a profession, what all of you have shown through your work and your research, your studies, is a path to the rest of us to really start to look at this in our work and to prepare ourselves for an inevitable future. We have 10 years to reverse the impacts of 300 years or so of the Industrial Revolution. There's a lot of carbon dioxide and methane and stuff that we've put in the atmosphere that we need to take back. And interior designers can be a huge part of that. So thank you all so much for sharing your expertise and your time with us today. For everybody who's listening, please go out there, educate yourself. You can do more than you think, and you have a much bigger impact than you realize. Please go to the Carbon Leadership Forum's website. Their study is freely available. Please look at Interface's products. Please start to prioritize low carbon products in your work and start to understand your place within that cyclical renovation cycle and act accordingly, because you have tremendous power because of that. Thank you all so much for joining me today. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope the start of a really positive change in our industry. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Avi.
you.
Hey, design friends and fans. Now, it's a wrap. The New York Design Center's first ever virtual What's New, What's Next has been a mega hit with over 75 programs during the last 4 weeks. 200 Luxe started an inaugural Ambassador program featuring designers from all across the country. And then asked 20 designers 20 questions about what's new and what's next for them. Here's what they had to say.
I've been asked what my favorite go-to product is that I specify for nearly every project. I must say there's always a little Merida in the mix. Merida's long been one of my favorite flooring companies. What's your favorite personal go-to accessory?
These gold hoops, they're super delicate and understated, but also really classic. They always make me feel like I'm complete and dressed. What is your favorite pick-me-up snack from Butterfield Cafe after a long day of specking?
It has to be the marble pound cake and a coffee. It's that perfect sweet treat. What's your favorite showroom for lighting and why is it a favorite source?
My favorite lighting showroom at 200 Lexington is without a doubt Aero Studios. They always have really interesting lights with unusual kind of profiles. What is your favorite showroom for art and accessories?
Is Paul Donzello's namesake gallery on the 15th floor. Paul is known for his unerring eye, particularly for sophisticated mid-century Italian design, and increasingly for contemporary ceramics.
What are your signature colors in fashion and interior design?
Definitely pink, love. But when it comes to interior design, I've been known to make blue spaces very soft and feminine. When working with your dream client, do you prefer totally hands-off or very involved?
I prefer clients to be involved, but not too involved. I lead with a narrative rather than a specific program. To use this information creatively to design uniquely characterful space that captures and reflects the personalities of those clients. When presenting ideas to a client, do you show all finalized items at once? Or do you show pieces as you find them?
I always show it to them in sort of a full realized concept, sort of a look and feel, if you will, that gives them a real strong understanding of not only our design solution, design concepts, but of an overall design point of view, and sort of build the design from that point of view forward. What's your favorite showroom that's a home away from home or an office away from office at 200 Lex?
I love going to showrooms that really feel like an extension of my design studio, and when I leave, I feel really inspired and refreshed. What's your design signature?
My design signature is the use of bold and vibrant color. We thrive on the energy that color brings to a space, and we seek to infuse it in every project. What's one current design trend you would love to see fade away?
It'd be open concept living. I like rooms. I like rooms that interact with each other and with the people who are using them and that have purpose and function. What makes a showroom a must-see when you're specifying for a project?
I have 2 must-visit showrooms as soon as I enter the design center, and it's Crosby Street for rugs and Fair for furniture. So I ask what makes a showroom memorable and a must-see again soon.
First and foremost, product selection and design aesthetic. Secondly, does that selection and aesthetic line up with the project I'm working on? And lastly, is it a low-key vibe in there? I tend to gravitate to the showrooms where I feel that I can really take the time I need to find the product I'm looking for. What makes visiting a showroom special?
Cliff Young. I absolutely love all of the beautiful modern designs that they carry. They always have the most amazing mixture of textures, and I am obsessed with their new lighting line. What's that one personal accessory that everyone identifies as being unmistakably you?
Embracing indoor-outdoor living, bringing nature from outside into my interiors by bringing the indoors outside by creating comfortable lounge seating. Which showroom is your home away from home or your office away from home, and why?
Is the Atelier Berlin. Fantastic seating, really wonderful team in there, and I hope everybody goes in and checks it out. So let me ask you this, what's your favorite showroom for fabric and wall covering, and what's your favorite pattern?
I'm an avid collector of contemporary art and love to create works of art out of my own interiors. The wallpapers and fabrics created by Vutsa are works of art in themselves. They can transform the simplest of spaces into complete jewel boxes. They are spectacular. My question for you is, when you're outsourcing products for your clients, how often do you find things for your own home?
I am lucky to be in a profession where I can indulge two of my favorite passions. One is design and one is shopping. And every now and then I'll find the perfect piece. Our apartment, which has been referred to as the island of lost toys, is full of great stuff. What's your favorite fabric house and what's your favorite pattern?
When it comes to fabrics, I like to think small by supporting local artisans in their craft. It gives me great pride in supporting these local businesses and helping them grow. Think of it sort of as my decorative trickle-down economics. When you're out shopping or sourcing for your clients, how often do you find things for your own home?
When shopping for a client, I tend not to buy things for my own home. I think it's very important to stay focused on your client. When you go to the New York Design Center showrooms, do you go by yourself? Do you take an assistant? Do you shop with your client? Or do you take an entourage?
Oh, let me answer that. Hi, I'm Jim Druckman, president of the New York Design Center, and so happy to have all of you with us. We see designers in packs, pairs, with clients and without every day. Whether you're working solo or with a team, 200 Luxe is the most vibrant marketplace for design. Our 100 showrooms look forward to welcoming you, inspiring you, and helping you find new products and design materials for your next project. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your support. Be safe and be well.